Hey bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to tell you about some of the series that I am currently reading. I swear, not a single video goes by without me mentioning that I'm in the middle of too many series, or that I am trying not to start new series, or that I'm trying to cut down on the number of series that I'm reading. I thought today I would go over some of those series with you. This is actually the third video related to series that I've done on my channel. Back in 2018, I decided to do a series about series, and at that time I posted one video of some of the series that I had quit or DNF'd, and I posted another video of some of the series that I was reading at the time. That was back in April 2018, so it's been a little over a year and a half, so I figured it is time to check in again. In my first series I'm currently reading video that I did, I talked about 11 series, and these were the series that were completed series, and I only had one book left to finish the series. So out of the 11 series that I talked about in that video, these are the ones that I have completed reading since then. I've also decided to quit or DNF 3 of the series in that video, leaving me with only 2 series that are still on my currently reading list. I updated my spreadsheet and double-checked everything before I started recording this video, and as of right now, I am in the middle of 32 series. And to be honest, that's about where my number has been hovering ever since 2018, which is when I decided to get serious about trying to cut down on the number of series that I'm reading. I have been completing a good number of series every year, but for some reason I can't stop starting new series. In fact, I have more videos planned about series that I want to read but haven't started yet. So far this year, I have started 13 series, and I'm really gonna try not to start any more this year. Actually, it's 14 series because this book that I'm currently reading right now is a new series, and I didn't have that on my list. I've also finished or DNF'd 7 series this year. So I've definitely started way more series than I've finished, but I'm going to try to finish a few more before the end of the year. And every year in December or January when the new year is starting, I always go over my list of series that I'm currently reading and try to figure out which ones I've lost interest in over time. Anyways, today I'm going to be talking about 18 of the 32 series that I'm currently in the middle of. Because I have so many series to mention, I'm really not going to be describing them in great detail. I'll probably just give like an age category, genre, and elevator pitch. First, I'm going to start with what I consider to kind of be my low-hanging fruit. These are going to be series where I only have one book left in to finish. First on my list is one that I plan to finish very soon, like this month soon, and that is the Illuminae Files by Amy Kaufman and Jay Kristoff. I have read the first 2 books in this series, and I have the third and final book checked out from my library right now, and it is on my Space Opera September TBR. This is a YA sci-fi series that is unique because it's written in a really unique format. I would even say that they're sci-fi thrillers because they do have a little bit of a thriller element to each of the 2 that I've read so far. Another one that I plan to finish very soon is The Conqueror Saga by Kiersten White. I have read the first 2 books in this trilogy, and the third book, Bright Reburn, is on my fall TBR. This is a YA historical fantasy that is a gender-bent Vlad the Impaler retelling. I really hope to finish this one before the end of the year. Next on my list, I have the Elemente series by A.C. Gauguin. As far as I know, this is just a duology, and I have read the first book in this series, Reign the Earth, in 2018. The second book came out earlier this year. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard good things about it. It is more of a companion book than a direct sequel, so I'm okay with there being a little bit of time between me reading the first book and the second book. This is a YA fantasy, although it's definitely on the older side of YA. I would even consider it maybe new adult, mostly because it just deals with some really heavy topics. Now let's move on to some more of the series that are completed series that I feel like I am actively reading right now. First on my list, I have the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. I've read the first 2 books in this series, which are actually both short story collections. I hadn't realized it'd been quite this long, but apparently I read them in early 2018, so I really need to continue on in this series. This is an adult high fantasy, and it is a favorite of a lot of people that I know. Sadly, I was feeling pretty mediocre about those first two books, and I decided at that time that I wanted to play the video game first to kind of get more attached to the world and the characters before continuing on in the series. And I have definitely done that. I am a big fan of the video game. I've played a lot of it over the past year, and now I am ready and excited to continue on in the book series. Next, I have the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is an adult high fantasy, and this series is actually a reread for me. It is the first trilogy in the larger realm of the Elderling series, and I originally read this first trilogy like, I don't know, 8 years ago, but I never continued on to the rest of the series at that time. So now I'm wanting to reread this trilogy and go on and read the rest of the realm of the Elderlings. Robin Hobb is very beloved by a lot of people, both on BookTube and not on BookTube, and I'm really excited about reading the whole series. I am currently, at this moment, in the middle of the second book of this trilogy, which, like I said, is technically a reread for me. I am really hoping to finish this trilogy before the end of the year. Next on my list, I have the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. This is an adult high fantasy. It's grimdark fantasy, and so far I've only read the first book in the trilogy. I have 2 more books to go, but I am also hoping to finish this one by the end of the year. Next on my list, I have Planetfall by Emma Newman. This is an adult science fiction book, and I read the first book in the series earlier this year and absolutely loved it. As of right now, this is a 4-book series, and I have heard from other people that they think there's going to be another book in this series, but as of right now, I couldn't find any official announcements. It's not on Goodreads, so that's why I'm including it in today's video. Also, this series is more of a companion series rather than the sequels being direct sequels, so because of that, I feel okay putting some space between each of the books that I read. However, I am still really antsy to continue on in the series because I enjoyed the first book so much. Next on my list, I have Lightbringer by Brent Weeks. This is an adult high fantasy series that has a super cool magic system based on colors. I just realized that this is technically not a completed series, but it will be completed very soon. The 5th and final book of the series is coming out in October. So far, I have read the first 2 books in the series, and even though the final book is coming out in October, I'm fairly certain I'm not going to be able to finish the series before the year is over. I just have too many things that I want to read, and trying to jam 3 more massive books into the next few months is not going to work. While I did feel fairly mediocre about the second book in the series, I've heard that things get better. There's more twists and turns, which is what I've been enjoying about the series so far, so I'm still fairly optimistic about the rest of the series. And then the last series that I consider myself to be actively reading right now is the Shattered Seas series by Joe Abercrombie. This is his YA fantasy series that is Viking inspired, and I read the first book in the series just a couple months ago. I thought that first book was fast-paced and a lot of fun, and I'm definitely interested in continuing on in the series. This is another series that is more of a companion series, so again, I'm okay with putting a little more space between books. So this is not one that I'm hoping to finish by the end of the year. So out of all of those series that I've just mentioned, just as a recap, the ones that I'm actually hoping to finish by the end of the year are these. Okay, moving on from there, I have 8 more series that are completed series, but at this point I have waited too long since reading them that I need to start over in these series and reread the first books before I can continue and finish them. What I'm kind of thinking is that maybe next year in 2020 I can start tackling these rereads and work my way through this list by the end of 2020. We'll see how that goes. So first on this part of my list, I have The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. I read the first book in The Infernal Devices, Clockwork Angel, back in 2015, so it's been over 4 years since I read that book. Honestly, I am a little bit on the fence about reading the rest of this trilogy. I don't really have any desire to read other books in Cassandra Clare's world, but this trilogy, because of the setting and like the steampunkness, I am pretty interested in it, and I remember really enjoying the first book. So while I'm a little bit on the fence about this one, if I do want to finish out this trilogy, I'm definitely going to have to reread Clockwork Angel. And for the sake of transparency, I have read the first trilogy in the Mortal Instruments, but that was over 10 years ago, definitely pre-BookTube. I might have read the second trilogy, like I know that the Mortal Instruments is technically 6 books, and I don't remember if I stopped after the first 3 or if I read all 6, but I have read those in the past and I don't plan to revisit them. I don't plan to continue on in those stories at all. If I'm gonna read any Cassandra Clare, I think it's gonna be just this trilogy, and that's it, which might be an unpopular opinion. Next on my list, I have The Girl at Midnight trilogy by Melissa Gray. I read the first book in this trilogy, again, back in 2015, and I never continued. This is a YA urban fantasy. I believe it's sort of set in our world and has like a fantasy world overlap. Obviously, I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I do remember the world building to be very interesting. There was like this species of people who were half human, half bird, and another species of people that were half human, half reptile. They probably weren't actually half human, but they were like humanoid people that also had characteristics of birds and reptiles. And I just remember thinking that the world building was really cool. But obviously, if I'm going to finish this trilogy, I'm gonna have to reread that first book. Next on my list, I have The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. This is a YA urban fantasy, maybe paranormal series, and it is 4 books long. I have read the first 2 books in the series, actually, back in 2016. This is a really beloved series here on BookTube, and I did enjoy the first 2 books that I read. I gave them 5 stars and 4 stars. But for some reason, I never continued on in the series, and at this point, I would not want to continue on without rereading the first 2 books. Next, I want to talk about the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard. This is a YA fantasy, but also kind of dystopian series. It is a 4-book series, and I have read the first 2, actually. I read both of them back in 2016. That was all that was out at the time, and I just never continued on in the series as the rest of the books were coming out. I feel like this series kind of has a bad rap, and the biggest complaint I usually hear about it is that it was a mashup of other YA stories that were already popular. And I can totally see where people are coming from on that, but I honestly really enjoyed the world and the story. Or at least I have fond memories of it, and before giving up on the series, I would like to revisit the first book and see how I feel about it now. Next on my list, I have Under the Never Sky by Veronica Rossi. This is a YA science fiction trilogy, and I read the first book back in 2016. I haven't really heard a lot of people talking about this book, at least not recently. It was already an older book when I read it. It came out back in 2012. But I really enjoyed the world building in this book and some of the special powers that the characters had. I gave the first book 4 stars, and I definitely want to revisit it and continue on in the rest of the series. Next, I want to talk about the Fallen Isles trilogy by Jodi Meadows. This is a YA high fantasy, and it has dragons in it. I read the first book in this trilogy back in 2017 when it very first came out, and while I've had a bit of a rocky road with Jodi Meadows so far, I did really enjoy this first book in the series, and I gave it 4 stars. The last book in the trilogy came out early this year, and I am excited to get back to it. I'm a little unsure if I want to reread the first book, but 2017 was a little while ago, and I have so many other series that I want to finish first before getting to this one that I think by the time I get around to finishing the series, I will have to reread the first book. Next on my list, I have The Young Elites by Marie Lu. This is a YA high fantasy series that is a little bit of a villain origin story. I have read the first 2 books in this trilogy, and honestly, I've been trying to finish off this trilogy all year. I've put the last book in this series on my TBR multiple times, and in fact, a couple months ago, I checked out the last book and I attempted to read it, only to realize that I did not remember a single thing from the second book, and not very much from the first one. I tried going to Recaptains, which is a website with book recaps, and refreshing my memory, but it wasn't good enough. I quickly realized that I needed to reread the first 2 books if I wanted to finish the series. I did really enjoy the first 2 books, and as of right now, I do want to revisit the first 2 books so that I can finish off the series. Okay, now we're down to the last 2 series on my list, and these are 2 that I'm a little bit unsure about. Next on my list, I have The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. Up until last year, I considered this to be a series that I had already completed, but in 2018, Alexandra Bracken published a 4th book in the Darkest Minds series called The Darkest Legacy. This is a YA dystopian series, and I know a lot of people are kind of like over dystopians, but I am not one of those people. I have always loved dystopians, and I'm not yet tired of them. I really enjoyed the original trilogy, and when this 4th book came out, I thought it was the start of a second trilogy set in this world, but it looks like it's not. It looks like it's just a fourth book in the series. It is told from the point of view of a different character, one of the side characters from the original trilogy, but it doesn't look like there's going to be more books after this book. It has been a really long time since I read the original trilogy. I'm a little unsure if I actually want to reread all 3 books just to read this last one, but I also don't want to read this last book and not like enjoy it to the fullest because the rest of the series isn't fresh in my mind. So I'm a little uncertain, but it is a series that I really enjoyed the first time I read it, and I might be rereading it so that I can read this last book. Alright, and then the last series on my list is the Lumiteer Chronicles by Melina Marchetta. This is a YA high fantasy series. This series is 3 books long, and I have read the first 2 books in the series. I read the first one in 2014 and the second one in 2016. And now it's 2019. Honestly, this might end up being a series I decide to DNF, because while I gave both of the books that I've read 4 stars, I remember having some mixed feelings about them. At the time when I was first joining the bookish internet, this was a favorite series of a lot of people, and I really wanted to love it as much as everyone else was. But now it's been like 3 years since I've read the middle book in the series, and it didn't really make a great impression in my mind. What I remember is that I was just okay with most of the book, but then it had like a crazy ending that made me want to continue on. But now I don't remember that crazy ending, and I'm definitely gonna have to reread the series if I want to read the last book. Okay guys, those are all the series that I'm currently reading that I'm going to share with you today, because believe it or not, I have like another 13 or 14 series that I am currently reading. If you guys have read any of these series, let me know what you thought of them down in the comment section, because I definitely could be persuaded to prioritize or maybe even DNF some of these series. The DNFing being more for the ones that I have to reread, because that's a lot of work, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I actually also have a huge list of series that I want to start reading. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like bookish content. That is all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye. And subscribe to this channel if you want more bookish... It is 4 books long, and I have read... Is it 4 books? Alright, and then the last book... that I want to, that I'm, okay, now we're down to the last 2 books on my list. Okay, stories that were all, more books because I have, bye.